All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first week of Past to Present 2026. My name is Julia. I work in the education department here at Columbia River Maritime Museum. If you could all take a moment before we begin to silence your cell phones, I would appreciate that. So we are joined today by an Oregon Coast local, Vietnam War veteran and award-winning author, Karl Marlantes, who's going to be talking about his experience writing Deep River. Karl Marlantes was born in Astoria and grew up in Seaside, where he graduated from Seaside High School in 1963. He attended Yale University on a National Merit Scholarship and was graduated cum laude with a BA in economics. He attended Oxford University on a Rhodes Scholarship, graduating with an MA in politics, philosophy, and economics in 1972. He fought in the Vietnam War as a Marine infantry officer in 1968 and 1969. He is the author of Deep River, Matterhorn, Cold Victory, and What It Is Like to Go to War. He and his wife Anne have 5 children and 7 grandchildren and spend time between their homes in Cannon Beach and Woodinville, Washington. So without further ado, please welcome Karl Marlantes.
Well, it's a pleasure to be, in Astoria. I can go to the parking lot and see Old St. Mary's Hospital, which is where I was born. So I mean, literally from here, I can see where I started. I also want to apologize to the people who have heard me talk before, because I'm in that bind of I either have to repeat the stories or make them up, and this is the wrong venue to be making up stories. So if you've heard them before, just give me some slack. Writing Deep River, it's all authors have their motivations, I think, but when I think about what got me to writing Deep River, there were several things. One is that I'm very interested in how our views of spirituality change. And you'll notice in the novel that it goes through from a strict Finnish evangelical Lutheran, and I was raised a Lutheran, and there are a lot of rules, but on the other hand, there's my cultural background that I also motivated me, and I'll just explain these things. Because my father is Greek, and my mother's first language is Finnish, and my father's first language was Greek. They both started speaking English when they went to grade school. They're American, no accent, but that was that generation, the first generation that came here. And believe me, my brother coined the term cultural schizophrenia, because you go to the Finnish church and you go to the Greek church and they're shouting at each other. The priests up there with the incense and, "Oh, Sophia, you got a new grandchild. Yeah, that's better." I mean, and that was my household. I mean, the Greek side and the Finnish side, it was cultural schizophrenia. And so it lurks behind there. The other one is the labor movement, which I think we owe a lot to it. There were a lot of very brave people that had to stand up against a lot of pressure. And the other thing was that I wanted to talk about was the beauty and how privileged we are to live in this part of the world. When I was growing up in the seaside, who wants to go to the beach? We want to go to Portland and see the girls in the cars, I mean, that's what we did, I mean, it was like, but I go now, I can't believe it, but as they say, youth is wasted on the young. So all those things are going around. And then there's my particular relationship with my grandmother and my uncles, my great uncles, who homesteaded in Nacelle. right, which is right across the river. And it's where my mother was born in a logging camp there. Seaside, when I was growing up, was a logging town. And what struck me about that industry is the irony. You have little tiny people, okay? Little tiny people. Look at that. And they cut down those kinds of trees. And it was incredibly dangerous. And they risked their lives, and the women worked their asses off, and there weren't too many big asses back then either. And the irony is that the old growth forest is gone. And it wasn't like they were mean, or they didn't even think about it. They had to put food on the table, and that's what they were doing. And that incredible bravery resulted in, I don't know if there's any old growth left in Clatsop County, and over on Long Island, right off of in Willapa Bay, there's some, but it's gone. The peak cut in Clatsop County, which is surprised me, was 1972. And my Uncle Yucca, who was they're all great Uncle Yucca, my grandmother's cousin's husband, anyway, Yucca, he had hands that were like this big, because you're working with that cable, all nice steel cable. He said they were in the bunkhouse one night, and they wondered if they could ever cut Clatsop County out. And this was about 1920s. And they agreed, no, that the forest would grow faster than we can cut it. And he said, then somebody in Germany named Stihl, invented the chainsaw. And we are so impacted by technology and technology change, and we're never catching up. We're always behind. Well, the chainsaw just changed everything. The trees came down. That kind of tree would take a week. Then it came down in a couple of hours. Just those kinds of changes. So all that is going on the back of my head. And so then how did I start a novel, and why? And that's where it gets kind of like weird novelist writers. I literally woke up one morning very early with an image of my grandmother looking at the Columbia River. And that's the image at the end of the novel. I mean, that came first. And what I was remarking about is what a life my grandmother saw. She started in Finland, no electricity. No one knew anything about disease. Poor people under the heel of the Russian government. And she came here and saw people land on the moon. I mean, that generation, talk about change. And so in a way, the novel is also about the 20th century. I mean, it's basically they came here in 1905 in the novel, and it goes right through with her looking out the window and reflecting on her life. So that was one thing. The other thing is that my grandmother was a communist. The Finns were very divided. And those of you with Finnish heritage know that there was a brutal civil war. I mean, there's nothing worse than two mad Finns at each other's throats, So, and it was whites against reds. And even in the 50s, I was visiting my grandmother. I stayed with her a lot, and my brother. And I met a little friend in the neighborhood, and I brought him in, and my grandmother was horrified. She said, "You get out of here, you get out." And she'd shoot that little boy. I mean, I was about 7 or 8, Grandma, what's going on? She said, "They're church Finns. They're whites. We don't like them here." My grandmother was a red, but in the 50s, there was still this antagonism. And so I grew up with that. And the other thing that I grew up with, I know it's like, I've told this joke before, but I thought that the Astoria local newspaper was called the Daily Worker.
Yeah.
It was always in my grandmother's house. It was always on the kitchen table, So I just figured it was the Astoria paper. I had no idea. And the other thing is I grew up, when people say communist, you think of Stalin and the gulags. My grandmother baked pies and made bread. I mean, that was a communist to me, you know. She didn't have any desire to take over the government. I mean, you know, who would be foolish enough to try that, especially today? But so and there was a moment that also just stuck in my mind. Those of you, we look like we're all of a certain age here. Remember Joan Baez singing the song about Joe Hill? I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night. An icon, a labor radical left icon. So I one day I'm talking to my grandmother and I say, Grandma, did you know Joe Hill? I mean, this is back in the 60s when I asked her this. She literally took a step back. That son of a bitch. This we're talking about a cultural icon here. That son of a bitch. And what? She said, we would work so hard to get men to carry the red card and be members of the IWW. And if you were caught being a member of the IWW, you were blacklisted. And that was not like you couldn't work in Astoria. You couldn't work anywhere on the West Coast. Your family would go into poverty. It was an incredibly brave move just to join that union. And she said we would work days, years. I mean, trying to get people. And then Joe Hill would show up for a weekend and sing a bunch of songs, and people and then all the cops would be coming around because they knew there was some kind of big radical thing going on. They're surrounded by cops. Joe Hill singing songs, and he leaves, and we're stuck with red cards torn up all over the ground. 3 years up in smoke. And I thought, boy, there's a different view of Joe Hill. Well, you know the character in the novel who is obviously sort of inspired by Joe Hill. Well, he wasn't. He did have clay feet, and I did some research on Joe. I did my historical research for the novel. He did have clay feet. You know, he probably was shot by a jealous husband in Salt Lake City. I mean, it just. But we make icons out of people. So the other thing is going back to the environment that was interesting to me is that when I was in grade school, central grade school in Seaside, and the log trucks went by, the floor would rumble. I mean, you could feel the log trucks going by because they had logs. They couldn't carry them that big, but they had one on each log truck. And the log trucks haven't changed size, and now it's 35 logs. I mean, again, the change, and again the hard work and the danger, and where are we now? You know, and so that was all behind it. And then when I was at Oxford, I'd come out of the Marine Corps and went back to school, and of course I was older than everybody else, and I saw a notice for a class called Old Norse Poetic Diction. Now that's just right up my alley, you know, and there's 7 or 8 other people that went to that class, and it was only in Oxford that you could do something like that. I mean, that's a study of the language, of the Norse language, and the pictures and images that their poetry used in their poetry. And I was the only person that didn't speak 3 dead languages in the class too. And I have to tell you the name of the woman who ran. I loved her. She was the Sigmundsson Professor of Ancient Icelandic Antiquities. I mean, only Oxford could come up with one of those. But Emily Dronke was her name, and she would serve us tea and cookies, and we'd read things like all the Norse sagas and Laxdala saga and Egil saga, and I started thinking even then it'd be really interesting because it was a bunch of Norwegians that basically settled Iceland, and they fled their country because of oppression. They didn't like the king, and what would happen if you had a bunch of Norwegians settle in the Northwest here, which actually happened, and you wrote a saga about that. So that's going on in the author's head, and And then I started reading the Kalevala, and the Kalevala is very important to this novel. Uh, and I ran into a dead end with it because then I got the bright idea. Well, I'll just tell the Kalevala, but set it, in Astoria and Nassau. It didn't work because the Kalevala is just a series of poems, really. There's no basic story. It's not like the Song of Roland or the Tane. I mean, these sort of big national epics, the Odyssey. There was no story. I couldn't structure a novel out of it, but I took the characters, like Aino, who's the central character, is from a Kalevala character named Aino, which means the only one, and she in fact committed suicide rather than be married to old Wainamoinen, who her father decided to basically sell her off. And I have the brothers basically they don't know what to do with her because she can't log. She's only this big, and her spirit is, like that. And I said, well, I can't have her kill herself because that's the end of the book. So so what happens as a novel is being written is I know who's still a central character and very fiercely independent, the only one I know. So when the guy proposes to her, and you see in the novel, she killed herself, and it wasn't that guy's fault. I mean, basically, someone else sold her, so I had her rip the necklace. And I think in the Kalevala she does that, but then I couldn't have her commit suicide. So then I had her walking up the trail and getting into the logging business. And that's another thing that I had from my great aunts. Most of them did work in the logging camps, and my mother was born in a logging camp. And logging camps were just, use Trump's term, shitholes. I mean, back in those days, I mean, there was no insulation, mud everywhere, broken cable, railroad tracks. I mean, I've seen pictures of the old logging camps, and you go, like, my God, people grew up there, yeah, and it's not pristine. I mean, they were cutting trees, and they were trying to get as many cut in a day as they could, and the women worked so hard. I mean, you try feeding 120 lawyers. I mean, sorry, 120 loggers. That's a Freudian slip. And what it took in those days, because there was no ready-made, bread from a bakery or something. They had to make it every day. There was no safe way to go get the bacon. You had to slaughter the hog right there. And those women did all that work. I don't think that any of us, men and women combined, could work as hard as they did today. I just don't think we have it in us because we're just too soft. I mean, these people came from, if you don't work, you die kind of a situation. And so I wanted to sort of show that. And I wanted to show, the oppression of the Russians. And I wanted to show the bravery of the people in the labor movement. But I also, and because I want to write good novels, I also wanted to show what it was like to be a timber owner back in the day. These were not bad people. They were just people trying to make a living. They just happened to make it better than the people that were working for them. And it wasn't their job to worry about, how much they were paying them as long as they got them. And you learn things like how important, again, the women were, because if the food was bad at a logging camp, these guys left because the wages were shit. So the food was what they wanted. And they're most young men and ravenous. And if you couldn't put out good food at your logging camp, you couldn't keep a crew. And so again, it would all sort of work together. And also one of the things that, this is just one of my peccadillos, I hate it when people apply 20th century or 21st century sensibilities or consciousness to someone in 1905. I have a friend, and she just nailed it. She called it historical chauvinism, and she was ranting about corsets. She said, They weren't stupid. Do you think women were stupid back in 1895? It's something to hold their breasts up. All this tight lacing sort of, gone with the wind and stuff. It's either teenage girls or just fetishism that is from our time period. Back then, they chopped wood, carried things, worked in they weren't dumb. It wasn't that uncomfortable. Oh, she's a historical clothing person who I got a lot of information from. And people, how do you do your research? I have friends and I've got several friends that own logging companies. And like when I had to have what's his name now? Jake went out of my head. Matty cheat on a contract. I just called my friend George Nelson up, who we went to high school. We played football together. I said, "Okay, George, it's 1910. How would you cheat on a contract?" He said, "Well, there are about 3 ways I could cheat on a contract." And so we ended up with Matty moving the boundary markers surreptitiously because he said that's what was done. There was a lot of cutthroat stuff and that sort of stuff. But anyway, the owners, some of them were rapacious bastards, and some of them were just decent people. They just happened to be businessmen, and they happened to be in the business of logging. So I didn't want to have one of these. Again, it's wrong. It's just not true that it was good guys against bad guys. My view, and if you read Matterhorn, you definitely can see it. Is we're both. We are both. I mean, I've seen the horrible worst part of humans come out, and the absolute magnificent best part of humans come out in the same day. I mean, if there's anybody who's had a lesson in how rapacious and ugly we can be if we let it loose, I see it, and I want to reflect it in my books. Even the colonel in Matterhorn, who was the villain, he was right all the time about where the enemy was, and he got into drinking. So who in fact gave him the job when they knew he was an alcoholic? That's the real villain. See, so it's complicated. You can't apply, our current view of things. And, for example, I gets coffee for her brothers. She didn't even think about it. I mean, that's what girls do. Girls make the coffee and give it to the men. That was just what was done. There was no sense of oppression or anything. It was like girls wear dresses and men don't. I mean, it was just the way it was. And getting your head back into that time period is very important, and not confuse today's consciousness of roles and stuff that just like they weren't conscious that they were going to cut all the old growth forest out. It's unconsciousness, not evil. I mean, there's a difference. It's like, you blame a child if they put their hand in the cookie jar and eat the cookie. No, they're not. They just want to eat the cookie. They're not wondering about good and evil or whether the long run they're going to get fat, or they're just, and in some ways, the people who came here to the Northwest and fished all the salmon out of the rivers and cut all the trees down, it wasn't even just nothing that they thought about. So our consciousness changes. And there's still hope. Oh my God, it's slow. I have this image. I have this image of artists, writers like me. Here's the population. It's the Queen Mary. It's a giant battleship with unbelievable force, boom, boom, moving in some certain direction. It's like, oh shit. And here's the writers with a 7.5 horsepower Evinrude on the bow. And then, but if anybody's studied vector analysis in high school or college, a force on any moving object, no matter how small, will move it. Will move it. It just will happen. So those of you who read, those of you who think about things, yeah, you're part of the Evinrude right now, but don't worry, it'll change the bow, and things do change. I mean, basically, most people think slavery is a bad idea today. 150 years ago, half the people didn't think it was a bad idea, and 40% of the rest didn't care. It's changed. We're still dealing with torture, unfortunately, but generally speaking, we're moving at least you don't prove your guilt or what. See, those are advances in consciousness, and art is one of the major literature, one of the major reasons that we do advance consciousness. And it's because of empathy. There's two kinds of fiction, and then I'll stop lecturing because I know you want to ask questions. Commercial fiction, romances, detective stories, thrillers, and then there's literature. And I don't ever want to poo-poo people who write romance things. I've got a lot of pretentious friends that, oh God, you know, Danielle Steele, she's worth $1 billion. All she does is write the same story over and over again. And I go and like, yeah, and I studied Danielle Steele. I actually read a couple. I can always remember Sunset in Saint-Tropez. You know where that one was going, but I outlined, and I could see, but it's not hard. She gets her heroine up a tree, and then she figures out how to get her down the tree, and then the next chapter she's back up another tree, and then she's down, and there's not a whole lot of character development. Same in you know, Tom Clancy novels. The heroes are just always heroes. They're always the same. It's like Marvel comic books. That's why they're comic books, because there's no character development. And it's the only art form, literature, where people identify with the character. We cannot get out of our own skins. I mean, we see the world through our eyes, and empathy requires you to see the world differently, to see the world as others see it. And empathy is learned. We're not born with it. Again, going back to Matterhorn, we're born with the mad monkey inside. Empathy is something that you're taught, you know. I have a good friend back here. I call him my publicity agent. Greg, he grew up in the back next door to me. And no fence between our houses. We both went in the Marine Corps together. We played, you know, we were in high school together. And the mothers were real different in those days. They didn't have counseling when something went wrong. Greg and I got into a fight, and Greg bit me. And we were probably about 3, you know. And Dorothy and my mother picked us up like this, you know, and separated us. And I had teeth marks in my arm. And so Dorothy, Greg's mom, said, Carl, you bite Greg. You know, I did. I chomped on his hand, you know. He learned empathy. You know, this is what it feels like if you chew on someone's arm. And it's learned, and we have to be conscious when we're teaching our children, our grandchildren, that these kinds of life lessons, you can't make kids safe from it like they're trying to do. You can't. If you do, they'll never learn. You know, let them fall down, let them get bitten. You know, it's the way it goes. As long as it doesn't kill them, then they're good. So I mean, basically, it was all those things that were coming together. Native Americans, how we lost that whole culture. Vasutati, who means anti-basket, was weaving baskets as a spiritual exercise. The mandala of the way that the weaves go, the consciousness that went into these baskets. And what do my Finnish characters say? She only sells them for 2 bits. I mean, you know, monetary value. And Ilmarie's daughter, who was being taught by Vasutati, dies. And that's the symbolism of how we've lost that spiritual connection. That was the end in the novel of transmitting what basket weaving for conscious people meant. Now, for a whole lot of people, even the Native Americans, basket weaving meant I can have something that holds the blackberries. But there were people who were into it very differently, and they're the artists. They're the artists. So I could go on a long time, but I think that a lot of people came here to ask questions. And so somebody's going to be first and ask a question.
So
Oh, she's got that, yeah.
excited we're gonna keep.
There's the monitor. Okay, yeah.
For the trees everywhere or just in?
Oh, the big trees, quite frankly, I mean, that's a redwood. The New Yorkers didn't know the difference. You could tell by you know, so they weren't even here. But don't spread that around. They got it wrong. The West Coast. I mean, you just think East Coast trees are not that big. This is, I was told by a forester, a guy who's a forester. He said what they call site indexes. Site indexes are a combination of the soil, the rainfall, the temperatures, and then the foresters compute these and have site indexes. The highest site indexes in the world are Pacific and Clatsop County. Bigger than the Amazon. Amazon's way larger, so there's a lot more biome there. But so these big trees are a result of a fortunate combination of rain, and we got a lot of it, soil, volcanic mostly coming enriched. And so the answer to the question is the big trees were jaw-dropping to Finns. I mean, they made their living lumbering, and it's goddamn cold there, and the trees are only getting to get this big. The grains are, and when they came here, it was like we could build a house. We could build 5 houses out of that. And so they thought they died and gone to heaven. And it was only in this area. Michigan had some big timber, but nothing like this. Yeah, everywhere. I mean, I've actually read a book. I wish I could remember the exact title, but it was "What Did Lewis and Clark See?" And these giant trees were everywhere. Astoria was covered with them, and they've all been chopped down. Seaside was covered with them. The airplane business, and again, Matty gets into that business with spruce in the First World War. Seaside and Cannon Beach had spruce trees, those old Sitka spruces, and they put them in rafts and hauled them up to Astoria on the ocean, and put them into wood, and then they sold it initially to the RAF and then to our own Air Force. Yeah, they were everywhere, and it just amazes me how we managed to get rid of it. Yeah.
Well, my grandma, I didn't realize until this year, I read a memoir. Her father was a blogger. And this has been the best talk I have attended in years.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. I hopefully will, some mimosas or whatever they call it, will rub off on me and I'll become a great writer too.
Thank you. I was going to say that the character Jens, who is in the novel, he's based on a guy named Ray Lurback that was a good friend of my mother and father's. And Ray's daughter is here. I saw her coming. There she is, right there. So there's these ties to this community that are pretty deep.
Yeah, I got a question.
Where are you?
Yeah, right here.
Okay. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I was gonna sit in the front row, but I figured that was a trap. But anyway, I was wondering about the Finnish immigration started in the late, I get the feeling anyway from around here, anyway, from the late 1800s into the early 1900s. And, like they were kind of the last of the immigrants to come and do homesteading, and homesteading around here was like, everybody else had gotten the good stuff. And, like around Longview and that area and there, they seasonally homesteaded the flats out there.
Yeah.
Out there around in there. What drove the Finns, to immigrate? I know there was a Russian connection, but I'd
Yeah.
like to, can you
Sure.
enlighten me?
First of all, I can tell you, I fished with my grandfather, which again, youth is wasted on the young. I would fish with my grandfather and we'd be out in the middle of the night because he did it with the tides. It'd be raining and the boat would be going up and down and water coming over the bow. And I'd be talking to my grandmother, how come we're out here? My friends all work in restaurants and it's warm and the girls come in and talk to them and they can eat all the ice cream they want. And I can just imagine my grandfather going, I emigrated to America to raise this, you know, in a way they did. But I asked him one time, I said, Grandpa, do you ever want to go back to Finland? And he spit, he chewed tobacco. That goddamn poverty-stricken place, I'll never go back. Poverty drove them. The land was, as you increase people, smaller and smaller plots. And then the next thing was the draft. A couple of my great uncles said, absolutely, they came here because if you got drafted into the Russian army, 20 years, all right, 20 years. I mean, that was the end for you. You were just a slave. They found a way to get out, which was to emigrate to America. So two things, the Russian basically oppression and just poverty. I mean, it's just like, it's going to be a better life. And that's why, again, they didn't think about raping the forest. They thought about, God, I can have a house, you know, just a very different view.
Well, thank you so much for this book. It's a real page turner. And it really resonated with me because my grandfather, my great uncles, all worked and lived in Simon Benson logging camps
Yeah.
around Batsukanai, and I had one great uncle who was a locomotive engineer.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Went down and they made cigar wraps. And these are your stories about all this, reunions and the city park. I'm a Swede. And when I was growing up, Swedes and Finns did not get along. And I was struck by how well they got along in this book.
Actually, it was Norwegians that they got along with in the book. No, I mean, okay, when I was a kid, I have to fess up, I mean, there were some wild times here, but we used to come up to the dances at the Labor Temple here. And after the dance, the Swedes and the Norwegians would fight the Finns. I mean, that was racial tension back in the day, you know, and it was sport, but that's the way the sides drew up because the Finnish language is so different, separates them. And the radicalism. Finns were generally speaking very oriented toward radical politics because they came from a revolutionary situation. 1905, there was a first revolt against Russia and they got whooped, but then just, you know, 1917 was another revolution and that's how they got their independence. Whereas Sweden and Norway, kingships, gradual, change is slow. So the whole two cultures were very different. So it's a reason and it was just a historical fact of the way that people were raised in the different cultures, how they clashed here. And I don't know. And again, I think it's something in guys, they just like to fight, you know, or at least some of us. Not everybody's a Marine, and but you just have to own that part of you. And I'm lucky that none of us could die. You know, it was actually sort of interesting. I'm going to write a novel about a kid who is based on somebody I knew. I'm about 14. I'm delivering papers and it's dark, and I go down Broadway in Seaside, and cars coming up. It's raining. Cars coming up Broadway, and stops. Window rolls down. Hey, kid. Yeah, you come here. I was going, okay. It says, you know Johnny Shelton? I said, yeah. We got a guy back here who wants to see him. And I look in the back of the car and there's a gorilla back there. I mean, it's, you know, and I knew where Johnny was because he always went to the Molly Hogan Tavern. He was 18, but no one was going to throw Johnny out. I mean, you know, it's just, and Jim Ordway was there with him and Johnny Johnson was there with him drinking, 18-year-olds. And I go into, hey, there's a guy out here who wants to see you. Yeah. Well, what's his name? I can't remember his name now. I gave him the name. Three heads go together. He's left-handed, Johnny. And now, you're smaller, but so you got to get in close because these are going to outreach you. I mean, there was a culture all up and down the coast of these kids that fought each other, and people became champions. And it's a part of our culture that's gone. And some of us say, that's horrible, that's barbaric. On the other hand, it's kind of cool. To say about it.
Right, we got a question on this side of.
Okay. First of all, I want to tell you that from the very beginning of bringing in the character of Joe Hill, I was singing the Joe Baez song. So I so appreciated the ending.
Yeah.
So beautifully put together. And the other thing, I just wonder, do you have a midwife in your family history?
No, no, I have a couple of friends who are midwives, and I definitely, again, like I said, a lot of the research is just talking to people. And we were hippies and we had our kids out in the woods. I mean, my mother just went nuts with us, but we didn't realize how dangerous it was. Luckily, my wife was young and healthy and everything came out. But so I went through birth myself, watching it. Yeah. So that's the midwife story. Yeah. I have about 6. Really, yeah. And that's a matter of me stopping procrastinating and getting on to. So, I decided this year I'm going to learn to play the guitar. And my wife got on my case because I said, I got to practice the guitar. You're just trying to avoid your next book. And I'm like, she may be right about that, So I may have to give up my guitar to get the next book out. But yeah, I will die before I finish the novels that are in my head. I don't want to talk about it right now. And the reason, yeah, okay. Yeah, and the reason is they're like dreams. And in fact, one of the things that I've learned as a writer, you don't want to do anything that interrupts the dream because the reader gets into the dream. I learned it from Thomas Mann, he wrote something about writing, and he said, if your character goes into the 3rd floor in the hotel and comes out on the 2nd floor, you've really messed up because not only was that inaccurate, but you've broken the dream. You've broken the dream. And so now the reader's back, and so you can't. And so the same thing is that when I'm just kind of dreaming about it, if I bring it out too soon, then the harsh light of day sort of goes out and even I could go, oh, that sounds stupid. I don't want to do that. So I'm keeping it to myself. I've told some people about it and I'm getting the usual reaction like, I don't know if that'll sell or not, but that's one of the things about the book business, which you've got to understand is that it's a marriage between art and commerce. Novels don't get out there unless publishers make profits. I mean, you have to be cognizant of the fact that goddamn things got to sell. Otherwise, it might, be taught in a class someplace, but no one in the general public will ever get their hands on it. And it's a wild business. Morgan, who's the president of Rhodes, said 7 out of 10 novels lose money. 2 break even. All right. So now you got 1 out of 10 that has to carry the whole business. That's wildcat oil well drilling. You don't think about publishing as a wildcat oil well drilling venture, but that is actually what it is. And so when you send your manuscript in, they're not looking to see if it's a good book. They're looking to see if it's the 1 out of 10 that's going to carry the business. It's a very different thing. And you have to work together with this. And someone was asking Mario Puzo, the Godfather, the stats, when Puzo was alive, something like 70 fiction writers in America made a living off of it. And today it's not much better. I mean, very few people can make a living on it. And they asked Puzo about that, and he said, yeah, it's true. He says, you can't make a living writing novels, but you can make a killing. That's the 1 out of 10.
Thank you for the book. I'm a born and bred Hoosier,
Uh-huh.
so I'd like to know where your research came for the usual work ethic, because I can assure you that it's wrong.
I don't know. I mean, I can't even remember what you're talking about. Did I say something about Hoosiers in the book? Oh, I know what it is. No, no, no. Oh, no, 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 no. Yeah, that's what the loggers said. And what they meant a farmer. That, and they weren't talking about the derivation of the name. They just called you a Hoosier because you weren't a logger. And so it wasn't me. It was my character. And, but yeah, that's where it comes from. It was actual slang expression, even when I was a kid. God damn, he's such a Hoosier, which means he's such a farmer. Yeah, good. You defended the Hoosiers, yeah. Mhm.
Toward the end of the book, you talk about cannery workers starting at their union
Mhm.
cannery, coming down in the bar.
Mhm.
Cannery owners that tugboats come along and sort of dynamite with the barge and all the cannery equipment.
Mhm.
That based on.
I made that up, but there was considerable violence, and I didn't have an actual historical event. One of the ones that I do know that they would end up shooting. And I had another uncle who was a longshoreman, and when he went to the longshore meetings, he took a rifle with him because they didn't know if they were gonna have trouble, as he called it. And so that was in the 50s, and so there was considerable violence. I made up that particular form of it, and it may have happened, it may not have. Um, but that's the novelist. I have what they call it, poetic license.
So it sounds like you know lack of for the types of books that you're going to read or write in the future. I'm curious about what kind of process that you go through when you do decide on a book. That must take a tremendous amount of discipline. How do you structure your
Yeah.
process?
Well, Deep River had an outline that was 57 pages long. And the way I do it, and I think the way a lot of good writers do it, I mean, I don't know what Tolstoy did. I have no idea. He could have just been a genius and just spit it out. Apparently Jack Kerouac could do that. It's not me. So I outline, and in the outline, I'm very careful to try and understand what the character arc is going to be. What's that character want to accomplish in his or her life? How does she change? You'll notice Ino softens up quite a bit as life beats her to pulp, and that's her arc. And she learns that at one point she actually gives up her child for the movement. And by the end of the novel, she's pretty much more balanced. And also, she was, that's all thought out ahead of time, the character arcs. And I get then the plot. I mean, how am I going to end it? And so I work it out. And then I actually use Microsoft Excel, and I take each scene and I color code it. Like, this is a scene that is mostly exposition. This is a scene that's slow. This is a scene where there's lots of conflict and action. And if I see that there's a whole space where I don't have an action conflict scene, I invent one to put it in between to make sure that I keep the reader turning the page. And that's very conscious. And English teachers love to hear this, but the first draft is about 10% of the work. I mean, the first draft is the romance, and the novel is the marriage, and that's what takes the consistency in the work. And you go back and again and again, it's like, oh, Jesus, I had this character in chapter 4, and I haven't seen her for 12 chapters because I outline when they appear. And if I lose track of one of them, you have to bring her back, you know, so people go, whatever happened to, you know, Mary? She disappeared. And it's a classic, I guess you could say, new novelist problems. They'll introduce a character and then you go, what, where is she? You know, the Hollywood people say she's got to be paid off. You either have to kill her or she's got to end up in the book, end of the book, you know. So that's my process.
Yes, I got a question for you. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to just tell a very brief, interesting story about you and your big brother, Lauren.
Well, I love my big brother, and he was 2 years older than I am. And much to my chagrin, a lot of his friends called me Little Lori. His real name was Lorian, but it was Seaside, it was just too much. And then it was like, yeah, well, it's a girl's name, isn't it? But no one told my brother that, you know. Yeah, he looked out for me as a big brother. He's one of the great big brothers in my life. And one time, again, it goes back to the fighting. There was a kid named Marion Heller who was big and a kind of a bully. And when I look back on it, I now know a little bit about his home life, which was horrible. I mean, this is, you know, we forget how we've advanced. I was delivering papers in Marion and his house, and his dad came out chasing him with a baseball bat in his hand. I mean, this is a kid at that age, about 14, something like that. I mean, and no one would interfere. I mean, it's like the violence that went on inside the homes was horrific, but it was like, yeah, but I could, so don't do that. So Marion started picking on me because he was bigger than I was and everything. And my brother said, "You're going to have to fight him." And I'm going like, you know, I was a little scared. He says, "Don't worry." He says, "He might beat the hell out of you, but," he says, I'll be there with my friends, and he won't hurt you. He'll just, well, he won't kill you." So we squared off. I remember it was a basketball court with outside basketball court. And my brother stood there and he just told Mary, he says, "We're going to be here. If you do anything really, really bad, we'll beat the hell out of you." And so that was my brother who just absolutely just looked out for me that way. And Marion beat the hell out of me. But that was it. I never got into another fight. Everyone, "Oh, you'll fight back." I think that people could learn a lot from that today. I mean, just look at what's happening to Europe, you know, it's just.
She walks home winter in the snow barefoot because she saves her shoes. And that one thing I remember all the way through the novel, and it was really the most important thing that identified her to me as what kind of person she was. You have lists and lists of these kind of things.
I'm very cognizant of being specific. In other words, the dog chased the car. The 2-year-old German Shepherd chased the Chevrolet. You see the difference? It's flat the first way. Dog chased the car. It's not nearly as interesting to a reader as the 2-year-old German Shepherd chased the 57 Bel Air. You know, I mean, just in the exact, almost maybe a few more words, the image in the picture is locked in, just like you said. And if I had said, you know, "Oh, she walked home," you just go right over all the readers' heads. You got to put a detail in, and details are very important. Just for what you said, you don't know what the reader's going to latch on to, but if you don't have them in there, there's no latching. You know.
Two more questions. I'm looking back here.
So I have not finished your book.
You're forgiven, as long as you paid for it.
I foolishly gave it to my neighbor who dearly wanted to read it. He has a boat.
Uh-huh.
So he's been to Deep River. He's been to the nacelle. One of his best friends lives in the nacelle.
Uh-huh.
So he started telling me he was getting bogged down early in the book because he was trying to match up the geography of the place. And so his facetious question, he's not here today. But he wanted to know why the book isn't named Nacelle River.
Remember what I was talking about, commerce and art? Can you imagine trying to sell a book that's titled Nacelle? No one would know what the hell it is even. Deep River resonates. It's about depth. It's about spirituality. There's a lot of resonation from a title like that, but Nacelle, it was, and the other thing I always have to apologize for this. I know damn well that Deep River is about 5 miles upstream from the Nacelle River, but I just couldn't have my characters living on the Nacelle River. It just doesn't work. So they lived on Deep River. And for those of you who grew up in Deep River, I apologize.
I read that Matterhorn was written. I've been really curious if it was just sitting on a shelf for 30 years or if you were constantly adjusting to developing over that time.
Yeah, it did not sit on the shelf. I had over 100 rejections of Matterhorn and I couldn't sell it. I mean, and it was sometimes I just thought I was a damn fool. And sometimes I literally go down to a bookstore and I pull a novel off the shelf and I go through it and go, I'm as good as this guy. How come this guy got published, a piece of shit, you know? Or I'd start crying. I mean, not openly, but this, oh God, you know, why can't I? So that went on for 30 years. And in some ways it's a gift from the garbage because my characters got better the older I got. Because when I started, I was 2 years out of the Marine Corps, you know, and really young still. I was 24, I think, you know, and you hate to say it, but when you're 24, you really don't know a whole lot, you know. And I guess the frontal cortex doesn't kick in until you're 24 for boys. That's why they make such good Marines, you know. Perfect. But so what, and the racism. I was afraid to touch the racism because even though cancel culture is now so prevalent, back when I started writing, I didn't want to be one of these people that say, you're not black. How do you know what it was like? Blah, 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 blah. Well, I was afraid, but I thought I can't do that time period. I can't do that war, the culture in the Marine Corps and the Army without doing the racism. So we wouldn't have had any racism if it had gotten published. It wouldn't be anywhere as close to a good novel as it is now. So it didn't languish, and I kept plugging away at vacations. The kids would be out on the beach, and I'd be inside typing away or editing, and people started to roll down on Dad's novel. You know, it finally got published.
Before we leave all this time, I just want to make you aware of a couple of things. We have books. We have copies of Deep River for sale. Carl came by earlier this weekend and autographed all of them. But if you would also like a personalized message in your copy, I have a pen. And Carl will be hanging out here for the next however long he needs to in order to sign those copies for you. And this week is actually just the first of 5 weeks of lectures that we're hosting at the Maritime Museum. So you'll see there's these save the date half sheets on this table, as well as the tables when you exit on either side of the room. And that will list the 4 other dates that we have. So we'll have the next speaker on the 27th is the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission. And then there will be 3 weeks of speakers after that as well. So please take note of those save the dates. All right, thank you so much, Carl, for your time.